Hi, everyone. Thank you to everyone who can join us live and for everyone who's watching afterwards. My name is Aviva Hollander. I work in the Accessibility Services Office. I will be one of your presenters today, alongside my colleague, Leora Simon. Today, we're just going to talk a little bit about accessibility. So our first slide, we can go to the next slide, please. We just want to quickly introduce our team. So accessibility has 5 team members. Leora Simon is our lovely director. Myself, Aviva Hollander, I am the coordinator for accessibility services. We have 2 assistant directors. Our first assistant director is Megan O'Brien, and she's the assistant director for the Extension School. And then our other assistant director is Rachel Gregorgic. She is the assistant director for the summer school, along with our technology access and assistive technology specialist, Julia Herosian. So some quick housekeeping. These are our objectives today, to just give you a little idea of the layout we are having. And for anyone who needs closed captioning, you should be able to enable that on your individual computers. So the first thing we're going to do is just go over our mission statement. We'll talk about the laws that govern our work, reasonable accommodations, the accommodation process that all students go through to receive accommodations through our office, what you may need to know, and then we will end with our contact information. And at the end, we will have plenty of time for live questions and questions that students have submitted. So about our mission statement. So this is our mission statement. We strive to provide an equal opportunity for qualified students with disabilities to participate in, contribute to, and benefit from all aspects of their academic programs in the Division of Continuing Education through the provision of reasonable accommodations, modifications, accessible aids, and services, and academic adjustments. So this is a little bit about our commitment as a whole from DCE. The schools and programs of the Division of Continuing Education, or DCE is the lovely acronym, share a commitment to creating an accessible academic community. We accomplish our mission through an interactive and individualized process with students, evaluating needs on a case-to-case basis, which is important to know. We lead collaborative efforts with students, faculty, and staff to facilitate the removal of existing barriers to support an inclusive and accessible environment. Our services and accommodations are available to any DCE student. So any student who takes a class, they are available to, who has a current documented disability that substantially limits one or more major life activities. This is include, but certainly not limited to, learning, reading, writing, concentrating, and thinking. Services and accommodations are approved in advance and are coordinated by the Accessibility Services Office. We definitely recommend that students get in touch sooner rather than later, because it's really important to note that accommodations are not retroactive, meaning that they do not affect something that has already happened. So it's best to get them in place before you start class or before something occurs.
I'm Leora Simon, the Director of Accessibility Services. I was going to talk very briefly about some of the laws that govern our work. So this is a very brief overview of the civil rights laws in this country. While these laws are important, it's also good to remember that beyond the legal obligation, we also have a very important duty to protect and support civil rights beyond what's mandated, and encourage true equal access by positioning disability as an aspect of diversity. And excuse me, I have a cold, so my voice sounds a little strange. Okay, so first, the Americans with Disabilities Act, not to be confused with the American Dental Association, using the same acronym, was established in 1990. For me, this was after I was born. While sometimes it feels like we still have a lot of work to do in this area, it's also good to recognize how far we've come. The basis of the law is that it prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities. People with disabilities should enjoy the same access and opportunities as all people and shouldn't be disadvantaged. In 2008, the Amendments Act expanded the court's interpretation of what a disability is to ensure greater access. Essentially, it widened the definition of disability to the one we used earlier. Oh, I think I skipped a slide. Let me go back. Oh. How do I go back? Here we go. All right. So Section 504 is also a really important law that governs our work. It's part of the Rehabilitation Act of 1974, and it also protects individuals with disabilities from exclusion. It does apply to all entities receiving federal funds, including public elementary schools, high schools, and most post-secondary institutions like Harvard. There are a select few colleges, such as certain religious institutions, that are not accepting federal funds or financial aid, that aren't subject to Section 504. But I would say about 99% of the institutions in this country are. And those schools that aren't are still subject to the Americans with Disabilities Act. So the definition of disability, like I said before, in 2008, the definition was expanded. It defines a person with a disability as a person who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. This includes people who have a record of such an impairment, even if they don't currently have a disability. It also includes individuals who do not have a disability but are regarded as having a disability. Things to keep in mind: disabilities can often be invisible. We work with students with a variety of differences. Not all of these are visible. If you're not sure if you should request accommodation, you can always ask. Someone who may have a disability defined by the definition under the ADAAA might not identify with the term disability or disabled. Accommodations, modifications, and adjustments. So what are reasonable accommodations, adjustments, or modifications? So these are terms we use and are provided to eligible students with disabilities. They apply to all different types of academic coursework, including lectures, written assignments, field work, lab work, exams, discussions, or participation in class-related activities. This is not an exhaustive list by any means, but some examples might be testing accommodations, more time, captioning, closed captioning, a sign language interpreter, seating at the front of the class in a physical classroom, digital recording, flexible attendance, and classes in accessible locations. Just to be upfront, accommodations cannot fundamentally alter the learning objectives program or degree or lower the academic standard. We'll talk a little bit more about what that means in equal access in the next few slides.
So now we're going to talk a little bit about the actual process that students go through when requesting accommodations through our office. So on this slide, we do have a QR code that will go to our website. I'm also going to put the link in the chat for anyone who's joining live and would like to just pull up the website so they can have it in front of them. Our entire process is done fully online from start to finish. Students request accommodations by starting to log into My DCE. You'll click on Request Accommodations. If you are a new student to us, you've never requested accommodations before, you'll click register as a new student. This will prompt you to answer a few questions about your disability and how it affects you, and you will also need to upload documentation of that disability. You will then receive just a confirmation email saying that we've received your request. Once your request is in the system, it's been accepted, which means that someone from our team has looked over the request and accepted it into the system. You'll receive another email prompting your next steps. This could either be scheduling a welcome meeting, or some people will call it an intake meeting. It might prompt you to seek further documentation if our office needs more documentation to support a request. Once you know your next steps, if you were to schedule a welcome meeting, they're all done over Zoom. You can schedule it right in our portal. We call it ASAP, which is the Accessibility Services portal. During your welcome meeting, you'll meet with one of our assistant directors who will review your documentation and speak to you about the accommodations you're requesting, why you're requesting, and how our office might be able to support you best. Accommodations are done on a case-to-case basis. So 2 students who might have really similar diagnoses could end up getting approved for different accommodations depending on their specific needs as individuals. So once a student has been approved for the accommodations, our office communicates directly with the teaching team of each of their classes. The professor receives an email with the approved accommodations. We do want to point out that because our office operates under a need to know and FERPA, which is different than confidentiality, we do not disclose the diagnosis or why the student's receiving the accommodation, but we do disclose the accommodations approved and for which student. So we don't work under HIPAA, so it's a little bit different, but at no point is anyone told the diagnosis and personal details like that, just the accommodation and that it's been approved. And if they have more questions, they can always come directly to our office.
Aviva, this is me, right? I think so.
Yes.
Okay, good. Just making sure. All right. So important information, things to know. We are here to support any student that requires accommodation as a result of a documented disability. I also want to note that we are also here to support faculty in implementing, faculty, instructors, teaching teams, in implementing those accommodations and guiding them through their responsibilities. You as the student have to make accommodation requests to us on your own. Nobody can make requests for you. So that would be including parents or friends or other fellow students. We coordinate the implementation of accommodations, including exam administration for on-campus exams, note-taking, interpreters, and all that good stuff. One thing we wanted to highlight is you do not need to submit, and in fact, we discourage you from submitting extensive medical documentation to your instructors. We are here to help you. Your instructors are asked not to accept any medical documentation since we are the experts in evaluating this information. So we mentioned it before, but we serve all of the Division of Continuing Education, which would include the Extension School, the Summer School, the Harvard Institute for Learning and Retirement, as well as the professional development programs. Any student taking a class, whether it's for enrichment, for non-credit, for credit, we will work with everybody. We also wanted to highlight a central resource, University Disability Resource. They serve as the central resource for all of Harvard, work on faculty and staff accommodations, but they also represent disability as a part of diversity in a lot of different capacities. If you're interested in learning more, you can sign up for their monthly newsletter to sort of keep up to date with happenings. They host events around campus. They're hosting one, I believe, on Thursday, where they're screening the Crip Camp movie at the Longwood campus, and those events are open to the whole university community if they're featured in their newsletter. If you ever take a class as a special student at another Harvard school, such as the college or the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, you do need to contact the host school's disability office. For the college and GSAS, this is the Disability Access Office, which we link to their website. And we'll work, once you notify them, they'll work with us to get your documentation and make sure that your accommodations are appropriately provided to those instructors.
So something we also thought was important to highlight and speak about is how many people have disability and how it's something that is really common. So according to the CDC, 1 in 4 adults in the United States have some type of disability, which is around 27%. So you are not alone. It is something very common. If I can have the next slide, please. Alone in Massachusetts, it's the same statistic. 1 in 4 adults in Massachusetts have a disability, or around 23%. We just wanted to highlight that having a disability is something that a lot of people go through, even if maybe you don't know it's a disability or that someone in your life has a disability, whether, it was as a child, or a grandparent who is hard of hearing. Disability can touch us all in many different ways. And so we wanted to highlight that, which is one of the reasons that universal design is so important, because of how many people in the world have a disability and within the United States. Universal design is a concept that's becoming really important. For anyone who hasn't heard of universal design, it is a concept in which products and environments are designed to be usable by all to the greatest extent possible without the need for adaptation or specialized design. So something wouldn't need an accommodation because it's already accessible to everyone. Like I said, it's becoming very important, more important than ever. It is creating a better understanding of different learning styles in all aspects of life. Some really common ways you can see universal design around in your daily life is widened doorways so that anyone can fit through, whether they're using a wheelchair or need assistance walking. Another one is just having automatic closed captioning on everything, no matter who's accessing it. There's a lot of different things that are happening in our world to create it more accessible for everyone without the need to have to get formal accommodations. Something else that affects a lot of people with disability is ableism. I think it's really important for ourselves as an office and for everyone to understand ableism. Ableism refers to a system of discrimination and exclusion that oppresses people with a disability. This includes both visible and invisible disabilities. Like we mentioned, you might not know if someone has a disability because not all of them can be seen. It consists of a prejudiced and or discriminatory thoughts or actions towards people with disability. Like many prejudice, it's rooted in the sense that people with a disability are less than or inferior to people with typical abilities. it can often stem from the idea that a disability must be fixed or cured, that having a disability means that there's something wrong with you. And it comes from a sense that I need to fix that or cure it. There must be some remedy to make it better, but that's a really harmful way of thinking, and can be really extremely damaging and hurtful to people who do have a disability. Um, it is important to highlight that ableism is systematic and it exists across many domains, including the medical field, employment, social settings, political, environmental, and especially socioeconomic, and many more situations. So it's always good to keep it in mind and to educate yourselves on things that affect people with a disability. So if anything that we spoke about maybe spark something and maybe you want to seek to see if you are qualified to receive accommodations, or even if you have questions after the fact, you can always reach us at accessibility@extension.harvard.edu. If you prefer to speak over the phone, you can also call us at 617-998-9640. We are always happy to talk to someone and help them through the process of requesting accommodations. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. And speaking of questions, that was a good segue. I think we now have quite a bit of time to answer some questions. I know some people wrote in, so we will do our best to answer questions. And if anything comes up after you've watched it, like I said, feel free to reach out and we're more than happy to speak to anyone.
Thank you so much. So I do have quite a few questions that people had sent in ahead of time, and I think some of them have been answered in the course of the presentation here. So, but I didn't cross them off as I went. So forgive me if some of them are redundant. So the first one, HES has an amazing, diverse student body, and one thing, we actually received quite a few questions about how students who are from non-English speaking countries are able to get accommodations, particularly if all of their supporting documentation is in another language. And how does the process differ for our international students?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and one that we I think go back and forth on a lot, because we do serve so many different students from so many different countries. If your documentation is in another language, we obviously prefer English language documentation, since unfortunately none of us speak all of the languages, but we have definitely worked on a case-by-case basis to run things through translation services or software, things like that. And so if you are an international student with documentation in a different language, definitely reach out to us and say, this is what I have, send it to us. We'll look at it. We'll see if it's in a format that we can use. And if not, we'll try and troubleshoot specific ways to get to, a place where we can work with you. So great question.
I also will say, and I know it's not possible in every circumstance, but if your documentation is in another language, if it's typed versus handwritten, sometimes our office is able to translate it better, which gives us a better chance of understanding the full scope of what you might need, which is why we need to understand the documentation. So if you're able to get it typed instead of handwritten, that can also help us understand documentation.
Yeah,
Great.
we documentation is one of the parts that we use to assess somebody's eligibility for accommodations. The other part is, the student experience and sort of your own report, as well as like if you received accommodations at a previous institution. So it is an important piece, but it's not the only piece in us establishing services.
Okay, great. Thank you. Then the next question was, how is the accommodations office, breaking down barriers for students who are older, and many either don't know about what accommodations are possible or even, pardon me, identify as disabled. Um, and specifically, many students from HES have gone through school, both K through 12 and undergrad in some cases, before the ADA laws existed. So the question is, how can HESA and the Disability Office work together to ensure that students have access to this information, and what steps are you already taking to break down those barriers?
Great question, whoever wrote that. So we absolutely recognize that we're serving a non-traditional population. I will say we're always looking for new ways to sort of partner and get the word out that this is what we do and how we do it. I think doing an event like this is a good starting place, but we're definitely open to hearing ideas and if there's a different better way for us to get information out there, we're open to hearing it. Aviva, I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to add.
Yeah, I think it's important, and I know we mentioned it on one of our slides, but not everyone identifies with the words disability or disabled. I think those words can be important in the work we do because it's breaking down the stigma around those words, that they're not bad words. It's not a bad thing to have a disability. So I think that's why, specifically me in my work, because I do answer the phone and I'm very often the first person students talk to, is to use that word, but not to make students uncomfortable if they don't like using the word. So you'll see a lot of our work and documentate all like the documents that I send students do use the word disability. Even if you don't identify with having a disability, it doesn't mean that a part of your life doesn't qualify you to have an accommodation. Some people like the words like differently abled. Some people just don't like any of those things. They just say, I need accommodations, and that's totally okay. But I think part of what we want to do is break down that stigma around the word disability and the culture around it. So I fully recognize that people aren't comfortable with that word always, but I would encourage them to think about how accommodations could be helpful to them, even if they don't think they have a disability or they don't identify with that word, that they might still qualify for accommodations that could still benefit them in their academics.
Awesome. Sort of related is the question about what specifically qualifies as a disability, and what proofs are required for different disabilities. And I know that you did cover a broad definition earlier in the presentation, but I think what the student is asking for is like, is there a list that they can check against to see if what they have in their life experience is something that would qualify them for an accommodation?
Absolutely. They can always give us a call and speak to me directly, because then it's easier for us to get a full picture of if they might qualify or not without them having to go through the whole process and end up maybe we're not the best office for them to work with for accommodations. On our website, there's a part of it, if you just scroll down a little bit, that speaks about the necessary documentation for our office, and it breaks it up into 2 categories. So it breaks up to a learning disability and health conditions, whether that's short-term or long-term. And it gives a little bit more detail about what documentation we require. We also have a provider verification form that you can take to your doctor that will ask them specific questions for them to answer and send to us. So that can always be really helpful. For certain learning disabilities specifically, we do require a neuropsychological evaluation, or neuropsych, within 7 years. We do our best to work with students because we know they're not always accessible to be able to get a full neuropsych done, because they can be very expensive. So if you don't have one, don't be worried. You can still reach out to us and see if there's somewhere else we can go about it. But there's a lot of information about the specific documentation on our website. And if you're not sure if you qualify, definitely look at our website. It gives more information. And like I said, feel free to call, and I'm more than happy to speak to you about what the best next steps for you would be.
Great. Another question that came up is, is there any indication on the transcript if you have, or your degree, if you've leveraged any accommodations or accessibility services?
No, not
Okay.
one. No one. That's a good question though. No, it's not. There's no record on a formal transcript or graduation, nothing like that you worked with our office. The only people who know are our office. And like we mentioned, we notify your professors of the approved accommodations, but they don't know your diagnoses, and they don't know why you're receiving them. All they know is this has been approved and this is what you're receiving. But there's no formal record on any transcript about receiving accommodations.
Okay, great. I'm sure that that'll put many people's mind at ease. Another question we received was, are there any scholarships available to students, specifically students with disabilities from Harvard? And if so, where is the best place to find those?
So we don't currently have scholarships. However, there is a graduation prize that's awarded to a high achieving student with disabilities. But that's separate from scholarships, and that doesn't answer the question. But I did want to put that out there because we did award that prize this past commencement cycle. There are sort of like general resources for scholarships for students with disabilities that aren't school specific. That we can always point you to, and we can always send a follow-up list after this, but they are not Harvard DCE specific, but it is a great question.
Another question that we got was, how does the Accessibility Services Office ensure confidentiality and privacy when students are seeking accommodations? And especially, I know you mentioned that you're covered under FERPA, but not HIPAA. So yeah, I guess how are you safeguarding people's information?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and part of the reason why we wanted to highlight sort of the differences between FERPA and HIPAA. So information you submit to us is covered under FERPA, which has sort of different legal implications than confidentiality under HIPAA. And what our sort of mandate is that we don't share information unless it's need to know. And what that means is if there's an educational need to know. So in many cases, your instructors have an educational need to know if you have a certain academic accommodation, but they don't have an educational need to know that, you know, for Harvard Summer School, you received an air conditioning accommodation when you were here living on campus for 3 weeks. So we don't include that information. So I think what we do to safeguard the information is it is all kept securely separate than the rest of your student sort of information that you submit in My DCE. We have our own portal that is safe and cannot be accessed by other sort of constituents within the university.
That's fantastic. Thank you. The next question that came in was, are there specific accommodations for online courses and exams, for especially for students who might have learning disabilities, as opposed to more traditional in-person class accommodations?
Yeah, there definitely are. The first accommodation that popped into my mind is some students who have learning disabilities, like dyslexia would be a really good example, who need to use text to speech, so have something that's written down read out loud to them. Our office is able to remediate it to make sure that it can go through the software correctly, and that, for instance, if the exam is done in Proctorio, sometimes Proctorio doesn't always like those assist technologies. We're able to find a workaround, whether that's, proctoring you over Zoom instead, or changing settings so that it's accessible for the way you need it. I would say a lot of accommodations are for in-person and online, like extended time, or breaks. All of those can still apply to online classes and in person. Sometimes the way we go about coordinating it can be a little bit different, but I would say a lot of the accommodations can be very similar.
Great, thank you. Another question we received is, once you know that you need an accommodation, how long does it take? I guess, in other words, what's the turnaround? And I know you did say better to inquire earlier than you think you'll need to, but yeah, once that need has been identified, how long is that process?
Yeah, so our office typically says it's 2 weeks, if not longer, if we're using a third-party vendor. So if you get approved for an interpreter or live captions, and we need to speak to one of our partners and have them come and do that, it can take a little bit longer. If you're requesting them at the start of school when we're super packed and busy, it can take longer for our office to get back to you, but typically we say 2 weeks. But we always encourage students to get started sooner. Accommodations can apply if you're taking the cruise as well. So if you're not registered for classes yet, so you don't know what you're taking, but you know you have to take the cruise, you can still apply for certain accommodations that apply to the cruise. And then once you know you're registered, I would reach out and get started with the process, because during certain times of the year, we are busier and it can take longer. But on average, our office tries to do a 2-week turnaround.
Excellent. And how often do students need to reapply or meet with your staff to maintain their accommodations once they have been granted?
This is such a good question. So once you've been approved for an accommodation, it does not go away, but you need to put in a semester request. So we don't ask that you meet with anyone or that you submit any new documentation. If you're requesting the same accommodations you've already been approved for, all you have to do is put in the semester request, which is done a very similar way, by logging into my DCE and going to the ASAP portal, and you'll see it'll say semester request, and you just click on it and you scroll down and click. If you are requesting what we call supplemental accommodations, so maybe you approve for certain accommodations, you try them out, and you feel like you need another accommodation, or sometimes students have one disability and then get diagnosed with another disability. You would need to then resubmit new documentation of that new disability. And if you want supplemental accommodations, in some cases, it's done case to case. In some cases, you'll need to rehab a Zoom meeting with the assistant director assigned to your case. And in other circumstances, they might be able to just approve it over email. It really depends. But once you've been approved for an accommodation, that's yours forever. But you do have to put in that semester request each semester. Because of the unique students that we service, we don't always know that you're taking classes every semester. So that's your way of telling us, hey, I've registered again. Here are the classes I'm registered for. And if you drop a class and then add a new class, you have to re-put in a new semester request. So those are things to keep in mind.
Great. And what is the process for communicating accommodations, for example, extended time on exams, to professors? And second part of that question is, what happens if a professor won't grant an accommodation?
Ooh, I love that question. Leora might be able to speak a little bit more to the second part, but I can definitely answer the first part. So for accommodations, once they're approved, your professor will receive a letter and it'll say, I think it says like, welcome to this semester. We want to introduce you to blank. Below are their approved accommodations. And if one of them is extended time, whether that's 25, 50%, or 100% extended time, depending on the format of the class will depend on how we go about it. So if it's an in-person class, there's a really good chance that I will be coordinating your extended time, which means that I will send you an email and it will say, welcome, congratulations. Here's where you're meeting me. Here's the approved accommodations I have on file for you for exams, specifically related to exams. This is your start time. This is how long you receive. And then just like you would go to class, instead you'll come to our testing center and take it with me or one of our lovely proctors, which is basically our team. If it's an online exam, in most cases, your professor is responsible for adding the extended time on the back end of Canvas. We do recommend it's always good to check in with the professor to make sure your time's been added, because what we don't want happening is you to start the exam and then realize your time hasn't been added. And then in most cases, you can't stop the exam and restart it. And sometimes you can. It can get more complicated. So we always recommend that you can email your professor and be like, hi, I just wanted to check that, my approved extended time has been added. And then if they have any questions or you have any more further questions about it, you can always reach out to our office, and I'm more than happy to help facilitate that conversation with the professor. I think Leora can talk more about if a professor disagrees with an accommodation.
Yeah, of course. One thing I wanted to add, Aviva, was TAs and other teaching staff, other than the faculty on record, are not provided a copy of your accommodation letter. So what often happens is, the faculty gets the letter. We do say in the letter, like, this is not sent to any other teaching staff, whatever, but sometimes it's a really good idea to contact your TA before the exam and just say, hey, did you see the accommodation letter? Because they're often the ones who are responsible for implementing the Canvas exams and things like that. Best practice, check with your TA before the exam. And as far as, faculty disagreeing or not implementing accommodation, so there are some accommodations that require some dialogue with the faculty. Exam accommodations like extra time is not one of them. So I would say in 99% of cases there could be situations I'm not thinking of, but if a faculty member forgets to do something, that's a different sort of path we go down, versus saying, no, I'm not going to do something. And we would support you as the student. If there's a supported accommodation we feel is necessary, we would go down the path we needed to do so. Now, there are some accommodations that, like I said before, that we do have to dialogue back and forth with the faculty about, because we can't sort of fundamentally alter or change the learning objectives of a class. So one example is, somebody may have requested an accommodation to, not be a part of group projects, but they end up taking a class where group projects are sort of part of the core learning experience of the class, right? Certain management classes I know are like that. But they may be in a math class where it is absolutely a reasonable accommodation to not work as a part of a group. So that's sort of where the case-by-case individualized process works, because we sort of have to engage in that dialogue with the faculty. So little nuance, but I think hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, I think this next question is extremely related to that one, which is, how does the ASO work with faculty and staff to ensure that they're informed and compliant with accommodation needs? And are faculty provided with any training or resources? And it says especially TAs, so I'm guessing that that's come up before.
It sure has. Yeah. There is no currently there's no Harvard sort of faculty mandated training. There are definitely sort of talks about how can we Harvard-wide mandate that faculty are up to speed on this, but that sort of we haven't gotten there yet. With that being said, we are doing our best to get in front of faculty as often as we can. As you all know, our faculty come to us from other institutions, sometimes Harvard, but sometimes elsewhere, sometimes outside of higher education completely. So we sort of have a diverse set of instructors that we're working with, as well as teaching staff. And again, I don't think we've sort of solved that question and that we have it all figured out, but we do definitely try and get in front of them, at things like instructor development night and sort of the opportunities that we have to make those connections. We do definitely strive to be like a visible presence at.
Thank you. And this next question is related as well, which is, how do you handle disagreements or disputes between a student and professor regarding accommodations?
Maybe a little bit of a nuanced answer, but it sort of depends. So we do have an appeals process that students can use if they feel like their rights as a student with a disability have been violated. And usually it starts with a conversation. There are university level grievance procedures as well that are available to students if they sort of work with us at the local level and feel like they're not getting where they need to go and things like that. There is a university level grievance process, but I would say in the majority of cases we're able to sort of come to an understanding between both parties, and we work sort of as that facilitator.
Okay, and then I do have a couple of questions that are specifically related to international students. I know I asked one earlier, but are there any additional, and I think this is specifically for summer school, legal or visa-related considerations that international students with disabilities should be aware of when they're requesting accommodations, especially those who might need to take a reduced course load or if they require specific medical care?
That is a tough one. I might have to get back to you on that because, to be honest, I don't know the specifications around the visa requirements and if they have to take a certain number of courses. So I would want to connect with our enrollment requirements team before sort of making any statements on that question. But it's a good question, and I do think it's absolutely worth following up on. Sorry, I'm just writing that down.
And I think that this was already answered about if they have documentation from non-US based medical professionals or institutions, the process for getting those reviewed and accepted. And you had said to aim to submit them typewritten. They can be in the language that they were originally provided, and then you'll work with the student to try and get them translated, or like that's not something that they have to do in advance. So unless you had anything to add on that, I think we answered that already.
No, I mean, there are certain circumstances where if the translation we get from the automated translation doesn't sort of give us enough information, then we have to go back to the student and say, unfortunately, we don't have the information we need. But that's the same process we do sort of with any documentation. So yeah, I just wanted to make that clear.
Okay, and then and I'm not sure if you're the right people to ask this, so please feel free to redirect us. But this one is asking, can international students receive accommodations for cultural or religious practices in addition to their accessibility needs? And specifically, how are we ensuring an inclusive environment for diverse students?
Yeah, so this comes up a lot in the summer school where, dietary needs and things like that. So our office doesn't handle those sorts of accommodation requests, but there definitely are, housing team, our summer housing teams understand that students are coming from all over the world, and they usually try and be pretty inclusive. So while that's not sort of our area, I do know that, for example, in the summer school, there's halal options available. If a student needed a kosher meal, for example, too, that can be requested. So things like that are definitely taken into consideration.
Hey, and then the last question from me here is, or from our pre-sent in questions and me, is, are there any support groups or clubs for students with disabilities at Harvard?
Yes. So a shameless plug for the Student Accessibility Advisory Group. This is a group that it's open to any admitted degree candidates. I'm gonna type the name, and if you're interested in being a part of it, send me an email and I can connect you to the person who runs it. Student Accessibility Advisory Group, and they're sort of tasked with advising sort of the student experience working group on disability. Like, what are things that students from different colleges at Harvard talking about and things like that, being sort of like ambassadors to the different schools. So would love to have DCE represented, and I know we already do, but if anybody else is interested, yeah, shameless plug for that. There are also I believe there was I don't know if the approval process went through, but there was an additional just completely student-led group that was going to be Harvard wide. But I have to follow up on that because I'm not sure if those approvals went through or not. They had to get like the formal approval for the student group through the provost's office.
And I'll do a shameless plug as well, which is that
okay.
We at HESA do have the opportunity to have student societies form. And I know that we have a very active community on WhatsApp of students with disabilities. And so hopefully we'll be able to see a HESA student society form as well. So we'll definitely keep you in touch with us if that winds up going through. And
Great.
that is all of the questions that I have. Did anybody else who joined have any questions that they wanted to ask? We only have a couple minutes here, but if somebody had something. And I don't see any hands, so I will just say thank you, Leora. Thank you, Aviva, so much for your time. We really, really appreciate you you taking the time to go through all of this with us and to so patiently answer so many questions, and just really useful information. And I know that this is going to be extremely helpful for our community. So thank you. And do you have anything else that you think that students should know but don't, that you'd like to close us out with?
Nope, just that, Danielle, you were a great moderator, and would love to work with you again in the future. So thank you.
Great.
Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you everybody who came, and have a great rest of your evening.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.
Thank you, everyone.